Good morning to you all from around the world from a very wet and windy Auckland. It is about 9:37 a.m. on the 19th of August 2020. As always, this video is not legal advice. If you know, it's just an update on what's happening with immigration in New Zealand. If you want legal advice, you need to get in contact with us. We're going to give legal advice to our clients. Please leave a like on this video. It does help us get the word out. And don't forget to subscribe so that you're aware of when we put out a new video. Now, lockdown continues in Auckland. We're about a week in, another week or so to go. Though we've had some good weather here recently, which means a lot of people will actually breaking lockdown and going to the beach when they shouldn't have been there. Today's weather will help enforce lockdown, so it's kind of it's great to see the wind and the rain outside the window. We currently have 90 active cases in New Zealand of COVID-19. There are 69 of those from an outbreak we had, which caused the current lockdown. Another 20 who have come across the border, and we have one further case which has come through, which is a maintenance worker who was going into a hotel room after somebody had moved out of it, and they have caught COVID from being in that room. So on the surface, they've touched something and they've got it. We've got 6 people in hospital. We have no further deaths though, so it's still staying at 22 deaths for some months now. As a whole, I think New Zealand's doing it pretty well, better than possibly any other country out there. Now, today's update is relatively short. It isn't something we've heard from immigration. It's actually something from the Prime Minister, which she gave during an interview yesterday with one of our radio personalities here. I'm going to link to the article below so you see the full article that was written about this interview, but I'm going to touch on a few of the main points. Now, the interview came about because Australia is looking at bringing a trial of bringing in 300 foreign students next month. Now, these students will fly via Singapore to Adelaide, which is in South Australia, and they would use spare quarantine facilities that are available there. Now, New Zealand itself, as we mentioned before, doesn't have spare quarantine space at the moment. The government even asked, of course, in New Zealand to stop selling tickets. Now, they've started again as of, I think, last week or so. They started selling tickets again. But those ticket sales require you to have had a booking in a quarantine spot already allocated to you. Companies like Qatar are actually flying empty aircraft into New Zealand because there's just, it's hard to get those quarantine spaces and it's hard to do the bookings. This means with a maximum of about 3,500 people coming into New Zealand. We have about 7,292 quarantine spaces, so about 3,500 a week allowed to come into the country to quarantine. This week we had 2,500 arriving. They replaced about 2,800 who had just finished quarantine. So there is a little bit of capacity at the top, but not that much, but at least the backlog will start going down of New Zealand citizens wanting to come back home. Now, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has said that they will look at what we can learn from the Australian trial, but the government's position was that foreign students would not be let into New Zealand until next year. So the government has said that they have ruled out They haven't ruled out managing international students, even if they were in a separate facility set up just for international students. But she did say, and this is a quote from her, their focus should be on doing that in the new academic year rather than this one, given the work that would need to go into doing that properly. So what that means is that those looking to come back into New Zealand at some point this year to study this year, it isn't going to happen. Now, this is in line with the ban on applications that's currently in place until 9th of November. We've discussed that previously. It also confirms our view that some places, like university accommodation providers, were looking at running their own quarantine facilities. Now, I don't know if some of you might not be aware that a lot of universities will have halls of residence or basically accommodation on site at the university or at the location, and these are provided for students to live in and sort of be close to their classes. Now, those are relatively empty right now with the lockdown in place, but also with the foreign students not being here, so they could be set up to sort of provide some form of quarantine. Now, the university providers, the education providers, those doing English classes and all the other, not just universities, but all tertiary providers, they believe, and we agree, that foreign students are more likely to follow quarantine requirements in New Zealand than often New Zealand citizens would be, because they know that breaking the rules would mean they have to leave New Zealand. So there is that extra risk. We have had a number of people, New Zealand citizens, coming to the country and actually breaking quarantine, breaking out. One has gone to buy alcohol, one has gone to the supermarket to buy some hair products, which we thought was kind of crazy. But foreign students, we think, would come in here, they would respect the rules, knowing that if they broke it, they would be gone. And I think coming to New Zealand would be a privilege to some degree. So what we're waiting for now is that the New Zealand universities and the other education providers who want to provide this quarantine service are waiting for our Ministry of Health to set standards for how those things should be done, and we're expecting those standards to be released this month. So hopefully once those are released, we'll get an idea as to how this can be done going forward. Now, the Australian trial, we'll just mention that, is that it has gained a lot of criticism. Now, for those who don't know, Australia is broken up into several states and territories. So you have, it's not just one big country, well, it's one big country, but they also have separate states, much like the US does, has the separate states. So currently we have the state of Victoria, which is one which has Melbourne in it, and that's being hit rather hard. The idea is that they'll bring in students into South Australia, which is actually doing very well. A number of the states are, but of course at the same time as doing that, they're preventing people going from, say, Victoria into South Australia, or for other areas of Australia into South Australia due to the risk. And they're saying, well, that isn't fair. We have family in South Australia, we want to go visit them, and that sort of approach. Why are you letting in foreign students? One of the health officials for South Australia actually stated that it's actually a higher risk to people from Victoria, where there's definitely a major outbreak, than from these countries who will often have the virus under control. Now, we haven't read the rules for the Australian trial. We'd imagine that there is some sort of requirement, of course, that you're tested, you're going through Singapore, but also that you're not coming from a country where there is a massive outbreak. So it's more likely to have probably the students from China, perhaps, where there is a lot more control. We're not quite sure as to whether it'll be open to Indian students. Indian, sadly, still has a number of issues going on there with COVID. But that's, if you're looking at studying in Australia, that is an option. I think New Zealand's a greater place to study, but that is that option. But it's only 300 people in the first trial. We'll see how that sort of extends out, and hopefully New Zealand can learn something from that as to how we can do it better. Now, that's actually pretty much it for today. What we're waiting for next is, of course, something from the Ministry of Health to say how the universities and the tertiary providers can do their own quarantine facilities. Once we have that, we'll let you know, and hopefully that will provide some more ideas to when we can open up the borders to foreign students. As I said, we are seeing the quarantine numbers coming down, which is fantastic, but they're not coming down enough yet for those border restrictions to be removed, or to allow more foreign students, foreign work visa holders, partners to come into the country. When we do see that, we'll let you know. We don't expect anything from immigration themselves in the next sort of week or so, but the next thing is going to be looking at whether those tertiary education providers can provide their own quarantine. We've been pushing for more quarantine facilities to be set up for some time. We think if you're in a situation where the current ones are full, then, well, you open some more up. And there's a number of hotels with the tourism industry being hurt here that are open, that are not being used. So we can set them up in those facilities, or set them up in the halls of residence, or these places which are set up for foreign students to live in. That would make sense in our view. So we've got Ministry of Health to come back with what those rules are going to be this month, and hopefully from then we can start opening the border. So until then, kia kaha, stay safe, keep those face masks on, and we will come back to you shortly.